Hi, my name is Lindsey French, and I'm currently based on Treaty 4 territory in Regina, Saskatchewan. I'm originally from the United States. My family is all on the East Coast of European descent, and I moved to Regina from Pittsburgh, where I had been living for 3 years, and I'd been based in Chicago before that. I currently teach as a assistant professor in the Creative Technologies program at the University of Regina. I'm really motivated by the possibility of art to provide us with an opportunity to practice. I'm interested in art as a practice. And I think that art has the possibility to do things that are related but different from the realm of the political. So for example, I'm interested in the way that art can allow us to imagine different forms of relationship. In particular with plant life or non-human life, plants and insects, organisms and beings where it can be sort of hard to imagine relationships beyond a sort of use value. So I'm interested in art as a practice to practice different kinds of relationship. I'm also sort of motivated in my practice by the idea of sort of practicing receptivity and practicing risk. Like, how can an art practice allow me to practice these things that I can then sort of take into other areas or other realms of life, particularly like political life. Yeah, so the concept behind phytovision is phytovision is looking to present experiences within this old-growth forest in western Pennsylvania called Cook Forest. It's looking to present some of the sort of sensorial phenomena from this location into the realm of experience or perception that's shared by both humans and plants. Cook Forest is, an old-growth forest in western Pennsylvania, and some of the trees, there's white pine and hemlock, and some of the trees that have been there have been alive since before settlers arrived. So I'm sort of interested in that as a specific location, but I'm also interested in this phenomena of plant perception, and in particular plant vision, this sort of hypothesis of plant vision. Is it, can plants see? What would it mean if they could see? But there is a lot of scientific evidence that suggests that plants can perceive certain areas of the visible light spectrum that we as humans can also perceive. So areas within the colors of red and blue, plus light and shadow in general. So the work here in phytovision includes a lot of slow motion or high frame rate videos of the white pine and hemlock in this old growth forest. And so it's slow motion video. It's sort of slowed down to a different experience of time. And so for the video, the technology is sort of essential there. I think we're used to seeing plants imaged in time lapse. We're used to seeing plants imaged in time lapse. But I was sort of reversing that gesture here, and instead of speeding things up so we could see plants sort of moving as if they were human or animal, I tried to sort of slow everything down so that we had to sort of shift our perception a little bit and slow down our experience of time. So I started thinking about vision and sort of light-based media, and then I expanded the project after spending quite a bit of time in this old-growth forest. I sort of expanded the media to include other sensorial phenomena. So I also worked with sound. In the show there is a recording, a playback of a geophone recording. So a geophone is an instrument that geologists use to measure sound and vibration in the earth. So I made some geophone recordings at Cook Forest and those are played back here as vibration through a seating platform and also like a leaning wall. So you can feel those movements of the forest floor. And yeah, I work with technologies for like two reasons. One of them is I'm interested in how they can provide amplification. So for example, I've amplified the experience of time with the high frame rate camera. I've amplified the experience of vibration by literally like turning up the volume or bringing these frequencies of vibrations in the forest floor into a felt or heard experience. And then I worked with amplification with the scent component. So here I'm working with the oils and terpenes that white pines and hemlocks release as scent signals. And those are concentrated with the addition of aroma chemicals. So they're concentrated and amplified as well. So yeah, I think the technology can provide a kind of amplification. I think it can also provide a kind of distance or like a ritual. Like I bring the geophone to the forest and it reminds me to listen in a different way. So technology can be, yeah, it can provide a sort of ritual for closer attention. Yeah, I mean, I'm really interested in the framing of the More Than Human show as a framework for rethinking our relationships with the more than human. I think the show does a really good job of, yeah, just like providing all of these different perspectives on how we might relate to beings and organisms and, yeah, systems that are outside of, or maybe not outside of, but that are in opposition to like capitalism and Western systems of thought. I think that, you know, I think that artwork such as these, like, I'm hopeful that they provide this other framework for engaging or for thinking or for attention to these kinds of organisms or these kinds of landscapes that are outside of an experience of like use value. I think it's Michael Marder, plant philosopher, who says that resistance to instrumentalization is a sure sign of love. And I think that's a really, to me, that's a really powerful way of thinking about how we might form some other kinds of relationships. So like for me, thinking about relationships with the white pine or the hemlock, once I step outside of thinking about how they might be useful, then I have the possibility of having a different kind of relationship with them. And I think it's really hard, particularly with plants. Like we think about them as food, or we think about them as performing like ecosystem services, cleaning the air. And of course they do all of these things, but they're also inherently valuable as living things themselves. And so if the show can sort of shift perception a little bit or allow us to practice that feeling or practice that experience, I think that that has the potential to, yeah, really offer different forms of relationship. I think it requires a lot of like continued practice, but yeah, I'm hopeful that a show like this can provide a starting point or at least a small experience of that kind of practice. Yeah, so in this work, I'm really trying to invite the viewer into what I propose is some sort of experience of plant perception. But there is a conceit there. I don't really know how plants perceive. I don't think any of us really know how plants perceive. But it's this invitation to imagine this other form of perception or like a multiplicity of forms of perception that are beyond our own sort of perceptual framework. And yeah, I guess I'm also interested in how imagining other forms of perception and imagining that plants perceive in a way that's different than us might also provide a kind of humility or a sense of like a reminder that we are not the only creatures, or we're not even the only individuals that are having experiences in the world. So it's really, yeah, a sort of invitation to imagine and remember that the world is not necessarily anthropocentric. So it's a way of stepping outside of that anthropocentric framework to imagine, yeah, other ways of being and existing. And I think that's, yeah, I'm interested in that also as a practice, because I think it's applicable in a lot of different ways. I think there's a lot in Western culture. I'm American, I'm a white American. There's a lot in that sort of framework that's really about like assimilation and really like seeing difference or experiencing difference and trying to assimilate that. And so I think what I'm looking for here is to really step into or practice an experience of non-assimilation, of realizing there is such a diversity of ways of being in the world that my experience well, I'll keep it as my experience is not the only experience, and to just experience and sit with that, and to maybe even find pleasure in that kind of experience, find pleasure in that recognition of difference. It's also a sort of reminder that there's, for me anyways, that there's a lot of forms of signaling and communication that are not meant for me, where I'm not the audience. And so a lot of these plant signals are not necessarily signals for humans or signals for me. And so, yeah, I'm trying to propose this experience that's a sort of reminder that not everything is, is for us necessarily. And that maybe that's a really beautiful and exciting thing to reckon with or to experience. This particular piece is all situated around this area of land in western Pennsylvania, this old growth forest that's currently called Cook Forest. But you know, one of the interesting things about this piece of land is that as I was spending more time, I spent sort of like years there before making the recordings. But it also sort of prompted me to learn more about the history of that landscape, not just the ecological history, but also like the longer human history. And that land was was ceded in this unfair treaty. I think it was in 1784. And you know, parts of that land was later, like in 1794. Parts of that land surrounding Cook Forest was given back to the Confederacy of Six Nations, which the Haudenosaunee. And so, you know, spending time in this beautiful place with these, you know, beautiful old growth trees and thinking about that history there really sort of really led up to an understanding of the longer human history there and some of the injustices on that land, which I think is also like a really important part of thinking about these ecologies and thinking about these more than human landscapes. They're often really embedded with the violences of the past, at the same time that these more than human organisms have been there, like bearing witness to these sort of horrific human experiences. But yeah, I think it's important also just to acknowledge that that land was held by the Haudenosaunee and cared for by the Haudenosaunee for a long time before it was called Cook Forest.